Welcome back to the channel, folks. Mr. H here for a very interesting turn of events. We have known that there's been talk for Star Wars for some time. We've got DB, Benioff, and Weiss. They have the Game of Thrones dudes. They signed a deal with Netflix. They also had some dealings with Disney going on for Star Wars. But now it seems that their deal with Star Wars is kind of up in the air as well. It's very strange. So let's get to the bottom of it, right? HBO passes on Game of Thrones creators. Star Wars deal might be up in the air. Now, we'll come back to this article. We'll go straight to the source first, right? Which is The Hollywood Reporter. This is the source of it all, okay? This is where that article based most of its information from. So, are Game of Thrones creators a smart gamble for Netflix? I would say no, personally. But here's where we get into it. So it says the streamer's bet on David Benioff and Dan Weiss is unusual in that the biggest TV overalls have gone to prolific showrunners who juggle writing with overseeing other creators on multiple platforms. They've not really done much. These guys, David Benioff and Dan Weiss, they've not done an awful lot. Yes, they've done Game of Thrones. Last season is rated one of the worst in history, I believe. They've not done a lot, but they seem to be riding high off of Game of Thrones. And I get that. I understand why. But people are banking heavily on them actually being successful. So it says, with a game-changing franchise behind them and another that might keep them busy for the next 6 years, Game of Thrones turned Star Wars maestros David Benioff and Dan Weiss have signed a 5-year $250 million overall deal with Netflix that has been met with envy and a bit of head scratching. Now, the interesting stuff is down here. So it says, in contrast, Netflix-based Rhimes, 4 years, $100 million plus, has 8 projects in the works halfway into her deal. Murphy, 5 years, $300 million, said that he has 10 projects 18 months after moving to the streamer, and Berlanti has a TV record 18 series on the air for Warner Brothers. The only way to make a deal like this work is if you have multiple shows. That's, a top executive told The Hollywood Reporter. The bet is that they'll do another Game of Thrones, and that's a big bet. They don't have any other shows on. It looks like, it's a very strange deal. Netflix are quite literally banking on them making a Game of Thrones for them. It's a huge, huge bank. So it says, sources say that the Game of Thrones pair is writing a treatment for Star Wars. Now this is where it gets interesting. For a Star Wars trilogy, so just a treatment, right? And a treatment can be as little as a few pages, right? Script treatments don't have to be that long. I've got a whole bunch of script treatments that I've been working through on the channel for... I used to do this series of unmade scripts, and some of them were just script treatments. There can only be a few pages sometimes. They're working on a script on treatments for a Star Wars trilogy, and they've committed to penning one of them. What? How do these people get these deals? I'll tell you what, Disney, what we'll do, right? We will plot out the idea for a trilogy. Maybe 15 pages if you're lucky. And what we'll do is we'll write one of them for you. Sorry, what? And Disney were okay with that? Why is everyone banking on these guys being hugely successful when they've done essentially just Game of Thrones? Very strange. Now it says it's unclear if the duo, who also have another feature for Fox and Disney carved out, will do more than just write for Star Wars. That's basically what, we just know that they're writing it. So it says, still, a person familiar with Netflix deal says the streamer was briefed on their Star Wars schedule and isn't worried. It's not going to be 10 years until Netflix sees their first output, adding that Benioff and Weiss have a lot of ambition. Now this is where it gets... I've been saying this for a while. The whole thing's interesting, but this is the clincher for me. Certain people command 9 figures, and we've made those deals, says Universal TV president Perlina Igbokwe. I can't say that name, who inked multitasking producer Mike Schur to a 5-year pact valued at $125 million. Benioff and Weiss is not a deal that I went after. So the Universal TV president did not want to sign Benioff and Weiss. And the same is said for HBO. The same is true for HBO, the duo's decade-plus home. So even they didn't want to sign anything with him. So sources said they were unwilling to offer the bid that Benioff and Weiss wanted. So they obviously went to them and said, look, sign us to a deal. Here's how much it'll cost. In excess of probably, I'd imagine probably 300 million or something like that. If they've then gone to Netflix and it's 250 million, I would say they probably asked more of HBO. Now, instead, HBO parent Warner Media is in final talks for a $500 million pact with J.J. Abrams, who already has 3 shows on the network. They sound a bit big for their boots, if you ask me. Now, this article here kind of just breaks it down into other bits and pieces. Now, it says new reports suggest that HBO, blah, blah, blah. Now, the interesting part is when we get on to the Star Wars, and this is where I think Star Wars is a little bit in trouble. So, we go down here. It says, we did a deal with David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, who are famous for Game of Thrones, and the next movie that we release will be theirs. And we're not saying anything more about that. That was what Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, said way back in the day. What was it like? It was this year, wasn't it? It was this year. But early this year. So they're only actually attached to one Star Wars film. But they're writing the script treatment for multiple. Now, Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy spoke to Entertainment Weekly in April. And she said, as they finish Game of Thrones, they're going to segue into Star Wars. They're working very closely with Rian Johnson. Ah, Jesus. Star Wars had originally announced that Benioff and Weiss would write and produce a new series of Star Wars films. They specifically noted that these new films will be separate from both the episodic Skywalker saga and recently announced trilogy being developed by Rian Johnson. Doesn't sound like it's very good. As we reported back in May, the ship might not be set right until Kathleen Kennedy's contract expires in 2021, a year before Benioff and Weiss's Star Wars movie is expected to hit theatres. So they've signed all these deals. They've got a $250 million deal with Netflix, where they have produced nothing for Netflix. They're not going to be producing anything for Netflix until, at the very least, 2023. And they signed that deal in 2019. 4 years. 4 years until Netflix starts to see a return. Wow. Unless they're not directing the Star Wars film. Which I hazard a guess they're not. Because I highly doubt Netflix would have paid them $250 million. Obviously, they don't have it yet, but you know what I mean. For them just to sit on it for 4 years. Incredibly doubtful. So, look, what do you think? What do you think about this? Star Wars, it's just up in the air, isn't it? Like, Lucasfilm, Disney, and Star Wars in general, the way I see it, they tried to go after the Game of Thrones. Both companies did. Because they thought, yes, they'll be successful. They will absolutely be a success. But then the other TV studios that have actually worked with them are refusing to go back to them. Which I think is really telling. You know, HBO had the opportunity to get them back on board again. They have a long-standing relationship with them. Which to me indicates that they are not good people to work with. And the reason why I say that is HBO has obviously had success with working with them. But it was Benioff and Weiss that approached HBO, not the other way around. And the amount that they asked for wasn't met. They couldn't come to an agreement outside of that. And it sounds like HBO just didn't want to work with them. Which, to me, sounds like they're incredibly difficult to work with. And of course, it's reading between the lines. I get that. But how else would you see it? So yeah, this Game of Thrones Star Wars trilogy looks like they're only actually making one of them. We'll do script treatments. Bearing in mind, remember, they can literally only be a few pages long. And then we'll just write one for you. It's absolutely unequivocally Disney and not knowing how to handle Star Wars. They don't have a clear-cut vision for the whole story anyway. They're hiring people to at least just pen an outline for 3 films, but only write one of them. So then you get other writers on board outside of that, past that one, and they're going to change the story. Have a clear plan and stick to it. This is why this new saga, outside of all the other crap that's going on, one of the main issues with this new saga, why it is so terrible, is because they literally don't have a plan. And you can believe what you want if you're a diehard Star Wars fan, but it's known that they don't have a plan. It's fact. Because they change things from movie to movie. Every director that comes in on the Star Wars now has free reign just to change the story. Why do you think Marvel works? Because it's a coherent, personal opinions to one side, it's a coherent continuity. People have expectations that are set up and they are met. Whether you like that or not is besides the point. That's why it's successful. Because the general masses like the payoff for things which are set up. So I think this just signifies Disney just falling apart again, even further. And I just find it really interesting that David Benioff and DB Weiss just have this bizarre, massive head syndrome. God knows what they're going to produce for Netflix after 4 years. But let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. If you're new here, make sure you hit subscribe. Guys, I've been saying this a few times now. A lot of you don't realise I've got Teespring. I've got merchandise. It's linked under every single video. So check that out if you want. All of the lines that are there now will be removed soon. You've got a couple of weeks left on that. And then I'm changing it all up. I've got a lot of designs that I want to showcase to you all. So please do go check them out. Got Godzilla stuff. Also got Xenomorph stuff. And also got Patreon. Linked down below in the description. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching. I've been Mr. H. Take care.